All right, I am here today with Jamil Middleton. Um, you do so many things, brother. You're gonna have to describe everything that you do. So we'll start right there, and
Right.
and we're gonna dive into this conversation around the future of faith.
Okay, awesome, man. Before we start, I want to say, it's an honor to be on with you, doing this talk, doing this interview. So thank you for having me on. Just to shorten it down, just like put a summary on it. I've been in ministry for probably roughly 10 years as an ordained minister, but I've been in different forms of counseling and relationship counseling, things like that, for roughly 20 years. Emotional counseling, marriage counseling, trauma counseling, and things of that nature. Have a background in African American studies. That was my focus in school, which focused on psychology of the Black experience and the African American spiritual experience. So that was my focus in school. And so that in a nutshell is primarily what I do in terms of what I share with people. I consider myself a student of life who shares my insights. I would consider myself like a member of the church of what works, right? I have spent my years trying to find what works in sharing my insights or experiences into that, as opposed to the staunch dogmatic doctrinal kind of thing, which is good and it all has its place. But I've tried to really search for the things that really helps transform people's lives.
I love it, and I love that shirt you got on, man. That is
Hey,
amazing.
it's one of my favorites, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that comes up for me when we start to talk about the future of culture. Whether we talk about Afrofuturism, is this the role that spirituality plays in that future? What are you seeing now, and where do you see the future going for Black folks in terms of religion, spirituality, faith, all of that?
Yeah. So, the place where I would really just start with, which I think is so relevant to right now, to whoever watches this in the future, is that we're in the midst of probably one of the most unique times in the past thousands of years with this pandemic, right? So one of the things that I see and I've seen in terms of how this time period has impacted Black spirituality, and I'll speak to the aspect that is probably most knowable to most people, which is the Black church. I see that for me, the way that we as a culture have approached spirituality, it's dying or it's in a cocoon. Okay, so I see it's in a transition, and there's a point where a caterpillar goes into its cocoon, and at a certain point, there are enzymes released that begins to break down the caterpillar and turns it into a goo.
Hmm.
And that's where I see where things are at. Because of this season and time, I think it's exposed some of the things that maybe were beneficial, but it's also exposed some of the things that maybe the enzymes of time are starting to break down to give us an opportunity to decide what we're going to become. So I think we're in a place of transition where we're kind of looking at what's been useful and we're struggling with what's been useful and what is no longer serving us. So I see us in a place of a transition.
Yeah. And what are those some of those things that you're seeing that have been helpful for us or useful, and then some things that maybe haven't been useful, and where do we go with that moving forward?
Well, one thing that I think has been useful and we're going to have a deeper value for is that, and remember, my focus is probably going to be in this conversation more the Black church, right? But the Black church for me is a vessel for the African communal spirit, right?
Mm,
Okay. And that's what has been valuable. That's been our technology. Okay. Like, so for me, that African communal spirit in which we've had the power of collective economics, we've had the presence of prophetic scholarship, right? That African communal spirit and the messianic principles that have been married with it, that institution and that technology has been something that has been a social dilator of America. That spirit of the African communal spirit, it's dilated the consciousness of America, right? It's been a barometer and a gauge. It's checked things that the dominant culture would have looked at had we not put a mirror up to it. And the communal spirit has kept us intact despite the experience of 244 years of payless labor and the traumas that have gone. It sustained us and it gave us a platform to sustain ourselves and then expand. You know, for a great deal of time, it was a prophetic vehicle to challenge society and to help transform it. But it also sustained us, and that unity was healthy for us physically and psychologically and spiritually. So I think that primarily that sense of togetherness, there's an energy, there's an energetic factor to having community that allows you to express different parts of yourself, and it sustains you psychologically. So that's something that has worked for us well, that I think we're going to value in a different way, and that we got to study and we need to learn how to carry it on in an effective way,
Hmm.
you know? So that would be probably the primary thing that I would say worked for us. It
Yeah.
worked for this nation.
So that African communal spirit, and then tying that with uh, it's interesting because inside of that there's a whole bunch of other stuff inside of that. Like, so there's the community, us understanding our spiritual essence and the power, and it's like it's that glue that's been holding us all together
Yeah,
and
yeah.
allowing us to continue. um,
Absolutely, absolutely. It's so powerful that when you look at the dominant culture here, it became a threat in the '60s where they studied what was the source of our power in terms of the development of the civil rights movement, right?
hmm,
Where we were fighting for civil rights and things. And what they found that it was that it was the family. It was the family, right? So they implemented things to begin to destroy that, to take that prophetic voice out of the way. So inside of that communal spirit, the heart and the core processing unit of that African communal spirit is family.
wow.
That's the technology, right? What's the first command in Genesis, man? It says to be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over the earth. It's talking about the technology of family, not only just biological, but also ideological as well. So your family can be those who you show the benefit of having the same consciousness as you.
Hmm.
You see? And when you do that, so when you replicate biologically and spiritually your mindset, that community then can manipulate reality, right, in such a way where it becomes a better habitation for humanity. That's the purpose of humanity. So that's what the African communal spirit has served its purpose in that. That's the purpose it serves, to replicate uh, community through families, interconnected families, and then serve as a medium for balance between creation and the principles of the creator or the spirit world or whatever you call it. So that family is the core processing unit of that.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about the family and the significance and the importance of the family, um, being this core processing unit. What this is, what I'm taking from this is that the idea of family is going to be definitely want to be one of those things that is going to need to be carried on, and then with the diversity of types of families, you also kind of talked about how it's really about ideas, right,
Right, right.
and not necessarily blood per se.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that now, right? We're seeing that now, in that when you look at it now, I say this, right? There's a saying out there that say all skin folk aren't your kinfolk,
Right,
right?
right, right.
People can make the mistake of thinking that just because you're from the same region or you have the same content of melanin that you're going to be able to work complementary, right? That you're going to complement each other, or you're going to be able to partner together. But it's about frequency, right?
Mhm.
Because you can take a small number of people on the same frequency and they can do a lot more than hundreds of people who aren't on the same page. So that's a big part of what the African communal spirit was operating on, and that's where the messianic principles were in as well.
It's interesting because this whole idea of all skin folk and kinfolk raises the question. Then, okay, if a person with a different color of skin is operating with a higher order of principles and ideas, where does that person fall in terms of family, in terms of Africanness, if you will?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a deep question, bro. You know what I mean? That's a deep question because we got to look at this. Check this out. I can have the darkest skin, but genetically, I may have more in common genetically with the European,
Hmm.
right? But someone, if they look at me and my skin is the darkest ever and they got dark skin as well, right? They may be vibing with me a certain way, but I may be just I may have a different way of approaching things. Likewise, there are people with a much lower content of melanin, but genetically or culturally or mind state wise, they may have more in common with those with darker melanin type. So these things kind of go back to what Martin Luther King talked about, which is dealing with people based on the content of their character. You see what I'm saying? Because appearances are very limited, but the spirit is something that links us together. When you really start talking with people and you can sense you're on the same vibration, you realize that the differences of background and things are negligible as opposed to the connection you have.
Hmm.
So you can have people who operate in the African communal spirit that don't look like the traditional melanated person from Africa. And this happened with us, right? Because we had people who had mixed blood, right? Mulattoes, octoroons, quadroons, all those kind of things, but they vibrated on that, you know? So that's a big thing. And I'll tell you, check this out. So a lot of people don't know this in history, right? But during the times of slavery and things like that, there were Africans who joined with Native Americans and formed communities called maroon communities, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. Those communities were enticing to a lot of the white immigrants to such a degree that they would leave the white colonies to join those maroon colonies, to such a degree that the white colonist officials had to start hanging signs up that say, if you leave this community, you will be hung. So these white people, right, white immigrants from Britain or France or Germany, they resonated with the principles of the African communal spirit that would be existing within these maroon colonies. Because when you went to those colonies, they didn't have concepts of jails and prisons. They didn't have concepts of the woman is just like a piece of property. They dealt with complementarity. They dealt with judging you based on what your soul could provide. So there were immigrant Europeans who, in large numbers, were leaving those colonies because they resonated with the vibration or with the character and the personality of these African communal spirit based societies out in the wilderness. So it's a vibrational thing, it's an idea thing
You know,
as opposed to an appearance.
well, when you say this, what comes to my mind is I think about. So we talk about kind of the dominant culture, if you will. I would say
Right,
the dominant power structure. I feel like the
right,
dominant culture is
right,
very much in alignment with these higher order frequencies. It's just that this power structure is what gets the voice.
Thank you. That's good. That's good. And I feel that. I 100% feel that because I don't want to mix in the dominant culture and align them with the dominant power. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and so that being said, one of the things that we're seeing happening here in Tucson is it's very much a mixing of races. So by what like 2030, they're expecting the Hispanic culture to be the dominant culture here in terms of like numbers,
Right.
um, and then um, and then you're seeing a lot like the you're seeing a lot of like mixed children being born.
Yeah.
So um, what's powerful about what you're saying is as we look into the future, it's going to be incredibly important to make sure that we're able to preserve this African, African spiritual um, construct or system of thinking, if you will, and be able to share that even inside of these beige communities that are emerging. So
Right. That are coming up everywhere, right?
yeah,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree with that.
that's so. So when you we see this trend, right? This the significance of the family, and there's so many different things that is going to be important for us to do to repair the family
Yeah.
um, going forward. What are some of those things that you see is um, going to be important for us? And then I want to go back because we didn't finish this the things that weren't working for us. We kind of skipped that. So maybe why don't we talk about that first, and then we come back to the family.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing that is not working for us that's being exposed is, to me, empty traditionalism. Empty traditionalism is one of our greatest detriments because in empty traditionalism, what you have is kind of this hyper addiction to doing the same thing at the detriment of having the infusion of new ideas.
Mm,
Okay, so it's there's nothing wrong with all the 100 hats services and the pastor appreciation. I think that there's no problem with that. You know what I mean? That's a part of community. But when when the problem comes is when you don't adapt and speak a prophetic voice of justice and addressing the issues that are emerging around you.
mm,
Okay, so we that began to decrease from the 60s till now, right? And so in that hyper traditionalism, there's a resistance to new ideas.
mm,
There's a resistance to new voices and new perspectives and new styles coming in that can help us continue to address issues that we're facing in the world,
mm.
like like poverty, increase in poverty, education, right, violence, criminal reform, and most importantly, why is the Black church, or why has it not spoken to the biggest epidemic that's happening to us, what I call the invisible Black Holocaust, which is a predominance of mothers who are raising their children without fathers,
Mm.
right? It's silent on that. So you have 70%, they say it's climbing, maybe 77% of Black children are being raised by mothers, single mothers. So
Wow.
those mothers are taking on the strain of being the provider, the caretaker, the nurturer, the psychologist, the cook, right? And that is impacting the children, in particular the sons,
Mm,
because sons, they develop slower and they mature slower, right? Because humans are not like a deer. A deer can be born and shortly after, it almost can fend for itself. Sons require the presence of their fathers so that they can develop the proper way, get the right social cues, establish their sense of confidence, give them assertiveness, and root them in the reality, right? You need that. if you don't have that, they become more vulnerable, 5 times more likely to get into crime, to drop out of school, become drug addicted, right? Non-productive, fall out of life. You have a whole new generation now that is struggling to feel rooted and to feel a sense of purpose. And it's a result of that. We're literally, like it says in Exodus, we're making bricks without straw.
Mm.
And that was a Hebraic term that was a metaphor for trying to make do with your life without the necessary tools. So you could say making brick without straw. You could say making homes without fathers. You could
Wow.
insert it. We're now making bricks without straw, and it's playing out in our children, because Black males are the furthest behind, the greatest number of poverty, the highest level in prison, right? The least productive males in America are Black males. And the highest number of children being raised by single mothers is Black children. And the church is not speaking to those things because of traditionalism, not adapting.
Wow. Yeah, when you said black silent black holocaust, I thought you were talking about the other thing that came to my mind, and I people gonna say something, but we gonna just put it on the table.
Sorry, bro.
Abortion. That was a
Hey,
concept that was originally started for the black community. It was
that's it.
called, what was it called? Like the Negro Project?
Yeah, yeah, eugenics,
Yeah.
the whole thing. Yes, Planned Parenthood, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that is, and we have the highest number of children being aborted. That is technology being destroyed, right? That's members or devices within the technology of the African communal spirit being taken out. This is the same thing. This is why those narratives in the scriptures is not supposed to be focused on just a literal factual based level. We didn't write like that. You know what I mean? We wrote the high metaphysical, practical metaphysical principles that happen cyclically in us. When they said, what, when Jesus was born, what did Herod do? He had the sons killed off.
Mm.
Abortion. He was aborting future technology for change, right?
Wow.
Same thing Pharaoh did. Pharaoh said, hey, you two Hebrew midwives, kill the babies. Because if sons are born, right, the flow of history is dilated, because people come and alter consciousness. And so destiny is changed. But if you kill off the sons, abort them off, vaccine them away, whatever it is, right? All kind of different things, then you can control time. So abortion is definitely a part of that. And now it's happening in an invisible Holocaust, is the removal of fathers.
Wow.
Because when men come through, they build new systems, new ways of being. You keep the women there because they sustain the realities that are built. You take the men out, you can control the future.
Wow. That's, man, wow. Take the man out and control the future.
That's it.
Mm.
It's a replay, man. It's a replay from the times of Willie Lynch. But the difference is, during slavery, we still were getting married in secret because we had the principles from our indigenous background, right? So check this out. Check this. Here's a ritual they used to do that they banned in the early days of slavery, because it came from the African indigenous wisdom. When a son turned 13 years old, right? In the camps, in the slave grounds, the men, they were permitted to still do this at the time. They would sit down the mother in the middle of the grounds there, right? And the community would be out, surrounding them. And the 13-year-old boy, he would go to his mother at 13 years old. The men, the fathers were drumming in the background. And the ritual ceremony was for that young man to face his mother. And what he would do is he would walk around her counterclockwise. He would face her, then he would start walking, and he would just walk. And the goal was to walk until all of his childhood boyishness was out of him. And when he stopped, he would turn and face her and say, Mother, I relinquish and surrender my childhood and acknowledge my manhood. And my role and my purpose is to make sure that all of my actions honor you from this day forward. And he did this before the men in the community, the women in the community, the daughters in the community, and he pledged his honor and respect to his mother. So there was a link between between mother and son that was backed by the support of the fathers, right? The reason they destroyed that ceremony is because it kept the spirit was too strong. The link between the community was so strong that they could not break them. So they outlawed the drums, they outlawed that ceremony so that they could begin to remove the influence spiritually, right? You got to take the priest out of the way first. They removed the priestly role in this ceremony so that they could separate the man out from his connection to the woman.
Wow.
You see, they
Yeah.
took that stuff out.
So, what can we do to recover this technology, given the fact that the family going forward is so important, and the family is beyond just skin color.
Yeah,
Um, it's about ideas,
yeah,
and holding to a higher order of thinking and being in the
yeah.
world. What can we do to begin to
Well,
address that?
like anything, when you look at doctors in the medical field, right? Everything starts with the most difficult thing, right? And that is the diagnosis. You have to be willing to get a diagnosis. Like, think about this. They say Black people least like to go to hospitals because of our experience in this country historically, right?
Hmm.
But unless you are willing to take the first step, which is to face truth, you can't go anywhere without that. So I say that to say one of the first things that any of us have to do on an individual level and collective level is we've got to have the courage to look at the pain and the damage that has been done to us. We
Mm.
have to look at the hurt that we're in that we often will ignore, right? Do you know there's generations that have drug abuse, but because it's been normalized and because it's so painful, no one ever stops to say, why has this been going on? Or abuse, it may be, sexual abuse, drug abuse, financial abuse, mismanagement of money. And you have generations that say, well, who am I to not be in poverty when my father and my grandfather and my grandmother and my great grandmother have been in it? Who am I to challenge that pattern? So to answer that, the first thing we have to do is be honest, take an honest look in the mirror at our lives so that we can take inventory of what damage is causing us to not live up to what we can become.
Mm.
And that's the first step, being able to look at our lives and look in the mirror. The universe is a mirror. Our lives don't lie, like your body doesn't lie.
Hmm.
During the pandemic, I experienced something called the flabdemic.
The what?
My weight start picking up, right? I was in the house, I was eating, right? I was gaining weight. And one day I looked in the mirror and I was like, oh my God, I look like a chipmunk, like the meat, you know what I mean? And I look like a chipmunk, right? So at a certain point, I had to say, hey, the truth is my body's not lying. It's telling me about what I've been practicing,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Now, the second thing I had to realize is that I enjoyed what brought me to that point, but I didn't like the results. Right? We can enjoy our limitations because we become familiar with them. And when those things become habits, they become values, right? So but once I looked at where I was, my body was not lying to me. I looked at the fact that I enjoyed some of what brought me to that point. I had to make a decision, and I had to start working out consistently to change some of those behaviors. So the first thing is looking at our lives honestly and taking responsibility for our lineage,
Mm.
right? We've got to take responsibility for what's been in our bloodlines. And from there, the second most important thing is this that I gotta share. We have to operate, or we have the opportunity to operate in the most powerful messianic principle, which is debt cancellation through forgiveness. We've got
Mm,
to cancel out soul debt. Christ said, if you forgive someone else, you will be forgiven. So to get rid of my debt, I've got to forgive those who pass down these curses, who pass down these habits, in order to allow me a chance to be free of my participation and reinforcement of those habits. The self-hatred, I got to get rid of that. The anger with mothers. Black sons have an issue with anger with their mothers because their mothers were in difficult positions, right? And they were stressed. And guess what? That stress was imprinted on the sons. So now sons are dealing with not feeling rooted, not feeling confident, not feeling a sense of purpose. So how do I free that? I got to say, hey, I was hurt by that. I have to be able to acknowledge it, even though society says don't say anything about your mother. Hey, I have some resentment against my mother, right? I need to let that go so that I can be what I was designed to be.
yeah.
So we've got to take a look in the mirror about the damages that have come from society, from our fathers and mothers, and our role in it.
Yeah. So really owning that past, and it sounds like what's going to be super important in the future is different spaces where this type of healing and conversation can occur, be they physical or virtual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because it's this. We sometimes will look at too big of a picture sometimes, right? We're like, oh, what's going to happen to the black man? No, what's going to happen to you? What's going to happen to me?
Yes.
Right? Because if I can really experience liberation, then when I communicate to another brother, I see myself in his struggle, and I got compassion and I got patience, and I can relate to him where he's at, instead of trying to get him to where I want him to be, because I know what it took. You see?
Mm,
So I have to consciously create space for my own healing so that I can begin to be freed, so that I can then become that space for someone else. We've got to stop looking for God to do miracles for us and start maturing to find out how to become a miracle and a breakthrough for other people.
yeah. That's powerful, man. That's so powerful. And it's interesting as time marches on. We're seeing if we could kind of shift the conversation a little bit, but kind of go in the same direction.
Yeah.
As there's this need for community, there's this need for healing, there's this need for family, and at the same time is still moving on, and there's new elements being introduced
Yeah.
um, into the black experience, whether it's the transhumanist agenda,
Yeah.
people becoming robots. You have like
Mhm.
the Neuralink, that Elon's trying to put in everybody's head. Like you, you got,
Right.
and then you have this fascination with becoming an interplanetary species. You know, uh, what do you say to all of that?
Well, I think that it's the God impulse in us that drives us. I'll start with interplanetary species, right? Um, the universe is expanding, right? There's an interesting thing in Hebrew where they have a numerical value for every word. And what's interesting is that the word for the universe and the word for the soul is the same, right? They have the same value. And that means that they have a special relationship, okay? So my point with that is, just like the universe is expanding, so too is the soul. So the soul desires to expand and conquer more and experience more and to domesticate it and pull out its full potential, right? That's the reason why we have trees, but the soul of men pulls tables and chairs out of that tree, right? There's stone mountains, but the soul of man uses those mountains to maximize it, to turn it into like castles and things like that. we take those things and we maximize them. So it's our soul. The soul's desire is to, in its purpose is to continuously expand. So I think that desire to colonize space is going to happen. I believe we are destined and designed to even go past this solar system. But the question is with what spirit, right? Because the other agenda now is there's this agenda to challenge our natural roles. Or people might hate what I'm about to get into right now, right? You might got to edit this out. Right? But there's an agenda, right, to try to blur all of the natural roles of humanity, right? But creation has particular laws. So if I tell a man that if he puts a seed out in the concrete, if he waters it enough, it's going to grow. He can do that for 100 years, and he can make a religion out of that, right? But it's not going to grow in the concrete because the laws of creation says that seed has to go in the ground. So you have these same challenges concerning like male roles, female roles, masculinity, divinity, and this transhuman thing is I believe coming out of this hatred that's being fomented against our natural roles as men, as women, as communities, and things of that nature. So I think there's a self-hatred that is rising, that is manifesting in a form of spirituality that is anti being a human.
Hmm.
It's everything to escape being a human. You see what I'm saying? So this is where your fascination with like the new technologies come from, where you get addicted, right? Or your fascinations with becoming a kind of androgynous, neutral creature and plugged into virtual reality. I think technology is great, but I think that it doesn't really take on its real levels until we honor our natural roles in creation.
Yeah.
You're supposed to like being a human. You're supposed to love being a man. If you're a woman, you're supposed to love being a male. But the transhumanism and everything is a deviation from the laws and flow of creation. And so I think that's the danger in it. You know what I mean? There's when you look at the different scriptures of the world, a lot of them are very detailed in explaining how creation functions, right? How does water interact with earth? How does earth interact with air? How does sunlight interact with the human body, right? We have to have the proper relationship. I can believe I don't have to drink water, but if I stop drinking it, I'm ceasing to exist.
Right.
You see?
Right.
So
Right.
we got to get back to a balance of valuing our particular roles in terms of how we manifest in the earth. Then those technologies, I think, can be maximized and not become destructive. We don't need to be polluting Mars and Jupiter with radiation and carbon emissions. There's better ways to do it. We don't need to be bringing conflict and hatred and all these isms that we struggle with. We need to solve that in the human family before we can take expansion and organic natural growth out into the.
Yeah. And my concern is they probably won't do that. Like that. That's.
Say that again, Mike.
I said my concern is they probably won't do that. They're just gonna ship all of this mess to someplace else, right? And
It don't change. You're absolutely right, because think about it. We've already polluted the orbit with satellites.
right.
There's
It's
space
just
already going on. It's mess.
it's tons of space junk. Absolutely. Yeah. And so yeah, this has been a really really good conversation. I mean, we've touched on a lot of things. We kind of went, on this journey, like really, and talking about the importance of the family and that being the CPU of this integral African spiritual system that holds us all together, and seeing that that's going to continue to play an important role in the future, and
Yeah.
and talking about a little bit, we touched on a little bit the importance of spaces, whether they're physical or whether they're virtual, that support this, so that as we move into the future and as we are impacted by alien objects, if you will,
Yeah.
upon the psyche, upon the body,
Right.
um, we will be able to manage that, or simply choose a different path.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's about getting back to the beginning, man. Take all the religion out of this for a second and different systems and all of that, right? Check this out. If you hold a newborn baby, right? How does that make you feel? What do you feel? What things come to mind? A fresh newborn baby.
Joy, like
You,
possibility, love.
you feel what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I say that to say this. We resonate with that because that baby is the manifestation of the essence of pure love. And it resonates when we feel those things, we are in our essence of pure love. You can choose to get into that, right? So my point is what we have to do for the future is we have to really master learning what it is to discipline ourselves to become disciples of living from the essence of true love. Okay, that's what we really need to get to. And in order to do that, what we have to realize is that I used to be about, oh, this, I'm an Aquarian, so I'm like always about let's change the whole world. And but I've gotten older. I'm like I changed the world by learning how to operate from that essence of true love. And the way that I stay in that is by practicing cancel. It's an inside job. Canceling any beliefs or judgment systems, challenging my BS belief systems that limit me from being a operator in that true love. It's about me because whatever belief systems I have that limit me or take me into a place of us versus them, or they hurt me, or they took away my opportunity, I'm going to see the whole world through that, and I'm going to project it onto you, everybody else. But if I take responsibility for practicing the technology of the African communal spirit and messianic principles, then I have to practice consistently canceling out the debt from my own BS, my belief systems, my judgment systems, so that I can remain as best as possible in that place of the raw essence of love. Because in the raw essence of love, I can address injustice, but not stay in the bitterness of it.
Hmm.
See what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
can address imbalance, but I don't have to live in the trauma of it.
Hmm.
This is
So
the we gotta get to.
that's that technology that you're talking about is it can be difficult to access.
Yeah.
And one of the other forms of technology that I see right now that's very much, I won't say competing, but it coexisting. Um,
Yeah.
and I think there's space for it to coexist. Is an ideology of, hey, we're just going to focus on ourselves and be with ourselves, and you know, in the words of Killer Mike, what is it? Kill your masters. Kind of like this kind of this.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very strong Black liberation message, and
Yeah.
and I would say that message has its place. Um,
Yeah.
and at the same time, what I also hear you saying is that there's coinciding with that, and there must be space for it, is this um, ability, desire, willingness to access this other technology, and in a way of love, right? And in a way, as I look at this, as I'm talking about it, what I'm seeing is that you can enter this technology if
Yeah.
you're not so completely tied to this one. Because I think you need to love yourself. You need to stand for yourself. And if you
Yeah.
do that, and you're willing to liberate your mind
Yeah.
from these ideas of self-hatred, and hatred of those who look like you, then you
Yeah.
can really truly own this space of love here.
Absolutely. And they're tied together, man. They're tied together because the more loving you become, and let me define this because love's a loaded word, right? I'm gonna just give a love, you could do hours on that term alone, right? Love, for the sake of this conversation, simply means not judging yourself and others,
Mm,
allowing people to be who they are, right? Doesn't mean you got to agree with them, don't mean you got to hang out with them, but love simply means not hating, right? A person who exists in that flow of love, they do kill their masters. They kill their masters within, right? Because it's the broken person who the power structure needs. If you're broken, I can tell you, you need this product to have self-esteem. You need this type of car, right? To get that woman. You need this kind of makeup to get that kind of man. But if you love, you are um, less vulnerable to the influences of the world outside of you. If you're in a culture and you're dealing with financial manipulation in your community, when that love grows in that individual, and then there's a community of people who start aligning with that type of love, they kill their masters by starving out the feeding of that entity, whether it's a banking entity, whether it's a gentrification machine, right? Whether it's a food machine, whether it's a liquor store on every corner. We begin to starve it out one individual at a time, because the more you love yourself, the less bullcrap you take from other people. A person that loves themselves is not going, a person that loves themselves will attract people of the opposite sex, all types. But a person that loves themselves will only keep the ones who can reflect the love they have for themselves.
Mm,
You feel what I'm saying?
yeah.
And that's the principle of this thing. You have to kill the slave master inside of you, and the one outside of you, the financial institution, the media giving bad images. It'll eventually die out because you won't feed it anymore.
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. And as I hear you talking about this, what I'm really present to is this importance of structures that cultivate that love, and a lot of
Yeah,
it has to do with cultural awareness,
yeah,
self-identification,
yeah,
uh, a knowledge of accurate history.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. And listen to this. What are you talking about? See, my journey has afforded me to go through traditional Christianity and then through a multitude of other systems, right?
hmm
In that time period of studying a multitude of other systems, at a certain time, I got this kind of bitter, um, kind of bitter perspective towards the church and all that, right? Because you learn a lot of different things about how there have been influences of manipulation, cultural overlays, and things like that. But when you really look back at the Black church in the essence of what it's been the structure that has, in large part, maintained a sense of cultural awareness, but also fueled the communal strength to alter the reality around it, right? Look at the civil rights. Civil rights, they harnessed dollars. They shut down certain bus companies that were taking them for granted by controlling the flow of their dollars, right? They changed voting policy because those communities had a cohesiveness and a unity and a love enough for themselves to vote in particular blocks, right? There was a place in Georgia where the men were afraid to vote because the people in that area, the police and things like that, had threatened to kill anyone who tried to vote. All the women cut off the cookie. The women cut the cookie off. They were like, none of you men getting the cookie unless y'all go and vote. That's power. You better believe they went out to vote. Do you feel what I'm saying? They were like, I might get killed, but I can't live without this cookie. So they used those messianic principles in the African communal spirit to create change, right? To alter reality. There was a point where Frederick Douglass was actually, there was a big talk about him running for president. But
mm,
that's because there was a unified spirit that opened up space for those kind of conversations and was behind him.
yeah,
So it does come with structures and families and networks. They have to exert the effort from the inner experience and the principles to manipulate reality to conform with the highest truth around them.
yeah. Wow, wow. This has been really good.
Yeah, I enjoyed this, bro. I've enjoyed this talk. We
Yeah.
always have some talks, man.
Oh yeah. This conversation is really taking me on a journey, and it's really identifying some very specific things that we need to put in place, and make sure that they are working effectively and efficiently. And how we
Yeah,
know that they are working and effectively and efficiently is that we see the love and the connection with each other, and
yeah,
we will see the physical results of this African communal system, because it will play out in how we relate to each other, what we accept and what we don't accept, and how we go into the future.
that's it. That's it. If you have love, to the last thing I want to say on this, if you're operating in love, you're not afraid to tell the truth.
Mm,
And that's what we're called to do. We're called to operate in love and tell the truth. When you're working with, or you have good friends, or it's your spouse or your children, when you love them, the true indicator of love is whether you tell them the truth or not. So when you operate in love, and you have communal vehicles and institutions that are operating in love, not hate, they are able to speak truth to the power structures, to the people in their community, to the economic systems, right? And they're
mm,
able to speak that truth and address it and bring light to it to give it opportunity to change. So I wanted to say that love and truth are twin siblings. When you
mm.
have love, when we recover love, when we acknowledge what's damaged us and the brokenness we've walked in, when we're bold enough to do that, we can allow love to begin to rise to surface, and then we can speak truth because we've gone through that process ourselves. We can
Yeah.
start speaking truth to the world around us. Start with yourself, then your home, then your community, and you impact it one person at a time. That's what our system, our spirituality is about, and that's what it has to be for the future. We've got to get back to getting back to a state of love, healing, and coming back to love, and then speaking truth so it can replicate itself amongst our community. We got to look at some painful things and speak to it truthfully, so that people can know what it is and see it and change it in our communities.
Yeah. You know what I love about what you've shared so far is, and I think that in a country where there's such division right now, there's always been division. It's just like really kind of put on display right now.
Yeah,
What you talked about has nothing to do with white folks.
yeah,
Everything that you talked about has to do with us.
that's it. That's it.
And so I think that's very important, and it's very significant on for two different reasons. Number one, it allows us to take that responsibility that you talked about earlier,
Yeah,
to own that responsibility. And then number two, it eliminates this addiction to centering white voices and issues.
thank you. Thank you. Mike, you said it, bro. And see, I had this conversation with my son because my son's a more avid reader than I ever was. He's probably at 11 where I was when I got into my 20s. So he's reading about history and getting an accurate view. And he's like, Dad, sometimes this stuff makes me angry and hateful. And I said, just allow it to become a part of your awareness, but never get stuck in it because you don't want to self victimize yourself.
Mm,
You see, I said the one thing you have power over is your reality, your choices. You have to be aware so that when you see things wrong, you address them. But wrong is going to come in all kind of colors. I said you're going to meet some white devils, and then you're going to meet some black devils. And you're going to have to deal. You know what I'm saying? And I tell them, but the one common denominator is going to be you and what you choose to do with your life. Because whoever you hate, you worship. That's what people don't understand. Whoever you hate, you worship because you make them the focus of your subconscious mind. And then you become or you adopt whatever negative traits you view them as, you see? So we have to switch from hatred or passing our responsibility off to, another culture and the impact they've had to our own reality. Doesn't mean we ignore the realities that are here. We have to address that. But if we operate off of love, then we cultivate our own garden.
Yeah.
We need to stop worrying about working on some other man's garden, right? And trying to change people to make them see things our way. No, something wrong, I speak truth to it, I address it, but I got to maintain my garden so not only I can eat, but somebody else who doesn't have something to eat can eat from the things from the fruit of my work.
Yeah.
Your fruit doesn't lie. That's less. Your fruit doesn't lie, man. What you're practicing is what's your fruit is going to tell the truth of what you're practicing. And
Wow.
somebody needs that fruit.
And that is a good place to end this conversation. Thank you, Jamil.
Hey, no problem. I enjoyed it, man. I always love building with you.
You bet.